here, and I want to acknowledge that Rabbi Danny is here also, all the way from Las Vegas, visiting us. So what a privilege for our community. I want to acknowledge those that are joining us in Zoom. Welcome. Of course, those that are in person. We have the privilege today of having the visit of Hannah Green, who is a former, the most important thing about her, she's a former ECC mother who lives now far away in Berkeley. And Hannah leads the work of J Street in our area, and therefore she was able to organize this wonderful visit and for us to have the privilege of hosting Israeli diplomat Nadav Tamir, who will be leading the conversation with us this morning. So with all that being said, Bruchim Abayim, welcome. And
Hi, everybody. I'm just so grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Rabbi, and thank you, Shanda and Julie, for organizing. So my name is Nana. I'm the Deputy Regional Director at J Street Northwest, and I'm going to let Nadav talk about what's happening in Israel. But if you have questions or you want to follow up and engage, my cards are on the table, and there's information there. And we have a lot of activities, and we have Marcy Gersten with us here, who's the chair of our Silicon Valley chapter, and she's the real leader of our activities. So if you're interested in hearing what's going on, so talk to Marcy as well. And with no further ado, Nadav Tamir, amazing Israeli diplomat with a career. He was a consul general in New England and diplomatic advisor to President Peres. And we're just so privileged to have him as the executive director of J Street Israel. And go ahead, Nadav, take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, Rabbi Nico. Muchas gracias.
Bienvenido.
Thank you, Rabbi from Las Vegas. Whatever happened in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. I'm so happy to be here. I'll tell you a little about myself and how I made the transition from being an Israeli diplomat to representing J Street in Israel, and then I'll jump into the issues of the day, which are pretty dramatic. As you know, as a former kibbutznik and officer in the IDF, eventually I find myself to the foreign ministry of Israel after the diplomat's course. I was told that the office of president of the foreign minister, it's hard for me to call him foreign minister after so many years. I called him president. That the foreign minister Shimon Peres asked that someone fresh from the course will come to his office, and they sent me. And it was the days after the Oslo Accords were signed, and probably the only time in Israel's history that the foreign ministry was actually leading on core issues. It doesn't happen a lot in Israel. So I had an amazing start for my career as a diplomat, and I got very passionate about the Palestinian issue and the attempts to solve the conflicts. I was there with Shimon Peres until the Rabin assassination, and then he moved to be prime minister. I remained in the foreign minister's office with Ehud Barak, who came from the military after being the most decorated soldier to be the foreign minister. But Ehud Barak was more interested in politics than diplomacy, so it was less interesting. And then my friends from the diplomats course started to go to different countries around the world. But I was obsessed that I wanted to go to Washington. It was after being twice in the US, first after backpacking in South America, after enjoying your country, your original country very much. I came to New York and was working as a mover because I knew that I need to support my studies at the Hebrew University because I was living the kibbutz. And the second time, when my wife did her master's in Columbia University, so we were in New York a second time. So I knew that the US-Israel relations is what really interests me. So I really wanted to go to Washington, D.C. And you usually don't get to go to Washington, D.C. in your first post abroad in the Israeli foreign ministry. You usually need more experience, but I had some leverage being in the foreign minister's office. So eventually I was able to go to Washington, D.C. in '97. And I was kind of in the embassy in charge of following and coordinating with the State Department and the NSC, American foreign policy. And I learned like a sponge about the American diplomacy and American politics. And I was very impressed by the power of what people call the Israel lobby. And I was pretty amazed that our small country have such an impact on American foreign policy. And I used to go to the APAS conferences, and I used to watch diplomats from other countries looking at me, envious when they, when they see every member of Congress standing on the stage saying, trying to compete with the others and show that they're more pro-Israel. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing thing for to be able to influence the most important superpower in the world. Later, I came back to Israel 1 month before 9/11, and another chance to work with Shimon Peres, who was foreign minister in the Sharon government after the disengagement. And then Labor left the country. I decided to pursue my master's and went to the Kennedy School of Government as a Wexner Fellow, and started to get to know the Israeli community, the Jewish community much better. As a kibbutznik, I didn't know much about Judaism. For me, something from the shtetl, different kind of Israelis, different kind of Jews working the land, strong. We had 10. And religion was something that the rabbinate was dealing with. When I came to Washington, D.C., it was the first time I really met the Jewish community, but I used to treat them in a very instrumental way. They were the way to get to Congress, they were the way to get to the media, they were the way to get to the administration. And only when I was in Boston as a Wexner Fellow and was kind of were embraced by the Jewish community of Boston, I really got to know Jews and realized that the instrumental approach is so wrong, that Israelis treat you American Jews as either ATM, a lobby, or a reservoir for immigration, but not as real human beings, and that we have to not just expect you to care about us, but we to care about you and to take into account what you have to say, because after all, I realized Israel was created to be a homeland for the Jewish people, which means it's your home as well, not only ours, the Israelis. So all those, things. And another insight that in that time, I started to understand that those mainstream organizations that I met in Washington were actually not representing so many Jews who felt that they didn't really have a home, because those organizations were actually saying that there's only one way to love Israel and one way to support Israel, which is to agree with whatever the Israeli government wants. And for many Jews, it just didn't work with their progressive/liberal values, especially when government in Israel started to be more right-wing. And they didn't think that in order to love Israel, you need to hate the Palestinians. And they didn't think that they have to give up their values in order to be Zionist. So for me, as a progressive Zionist, I very much understood those sentiments. And the other thing that I understood more, which I did not understand when I was in Washington, that a lot of this power
Bart, you got that big voice that you use all the time. You don't use
was actually, I have competition, was actually created a situation where for an American administration to do something proactive in order to solve the Israeli-Palestine conflict was too politically radioactive. And for members of Congress to speak about Palestinian rights, speak about the state solution was suicidal. And as someone who believes that the most important thing for Israel to remain what the Zionist dream is, both a homeland for the Jewish people and a democracy, we have to help the Palestinians have a state. There's no other way. If we won't have two states between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and eventually we won't be able to be both a democracy and a home for the Jewish people, we have to choose one of them. So I had all those feelings coming back to Israel, worked with in the foreign ministry some more time, and then we decided as a family that we want to go abroad again. My wife said, we are going only to a place we've been already. We're not starting from scratch. That meant either New York, Washington, or Boston. Boston was the only place where I could be the head of the mission or compete to be the head of the mission, because New York and Washington are political nominations. So I did compete for Boston, and eventually I did become consul general to New England, and got there right after the Second Lebanon War in 2006, and was there until 2010. Three things that happened while I was in Boston really led me to where I am today in J Street. The first thing that happened was a change of governments in Israel. The government that sent me with, the Olmert-Livni government was the last government that actually tried to do something serious with the Palestinians. The government that came in, the Netanyahu-Lieberman government, Lieberman was my boss as foreign minister, took a completely different direction on the Palestinian issue, on the Iranian issue, on bipartisanship in America, on priorities between evangelical Christians and the liberal Jews, and so many things that didn't really work with what I thought was good for my country, but I was still a civil servant, believing that I should change from within. The second thing that happened is that after President Obama was elected, I felt that the Netanyahu government is completely destroying the special relations between the countries in the way they deal with the Obama administration. I felt that they completely don't understand what Obama is and what he's trying to do, and that this is going to hurt, the intimacy. This is going to hurt Israel stature as a great friend of America, and also put the Jewish community that more than 70% voted for Obama in a very tough situation, which unfortunately all of it really happened. But what happened immediately after sending this memo is that it was leaked to the press, and there was a big media festival around it, and the government accused me for doing it intentionally in order to hurt them, and that I had political motivations. I was doing it only as what I thought I should do as a diplomat. In any event, that was another kind of sign that maybe I'm not the right guy to be an obedient civil servant. And the third thing that happened is that J Street was created. And when I was introduced to J Street, I said, wow, this is exactly what we needed. We needed an organization that could be the political home of all those Jews who were conflicted because they loved Israel. They felt that they were Zionist, but they were told, you're not. If you don't agree with with the settlements, with the right-wing government, you can't. There's only one way to be pro-Israeli. And J Street created a space where they could be connected to Israel and using their American citizenship to play in the American politics for what they believe is good for Israel, which is a two-state solution and more diplomacy than military power in order to promote Israel's interest. I was very enthusiastic about the vision, but I was very skeptic that they could actually do something, because I knew how organized those mainstream organizations and how much money there and how weaved they are with the federations. But I thought, I wrote another very naive memo saying that Israel should embrace the new organization, even if we don't agree with their policies, because that's the way to keep Israel, to keep Jews connected with Israel, even the Jews that think differently than the government. And actually, debate and criticism was always, as I understood it, as a secular Jew, part of Judaism. And we should allow it, just like Americans could be great patriots, even if they don't like Trump or don't like Obama or whatever. And we shouldn't use their political positions as a litmus test if they are with us or against us. Again, the response that I got from the government was, no, AIPAC is a very strong pillar of Israel national security. We cannot dilute their power and have any competition. But Israelis tend to be less disciplined than Americans. You probably learned that already. So I still kept in touch with J Street, and when I came back to Israel, I knew I'm not going to get any plum position in the Lieberman Foreign Ministry. So I was sitting in policy planning, writing papers that went to the trash because they were in the complete different direction, until I got a call from the president's office. And the director general of the president's office told me, the diplomatic advisor position is being open. Why don't you apply? It is a foreign ministry position, but you already worked with Paris, and we will support it. So eventually I became diplomatic advisor for President Paris in the last 3 years of the presidency, which was unbelievable because I was able to meet all the world leaders in intimate settings thanks to him. I mentioned Pope Francis many times, Obama, Putin, Merkel, Hollande, Xi, you name it. And also I felt that even though the presidents in Israel are more ceremonial, because who Paris was, we were able to balance some of the things that the Netanyahu government did in the different direction. And when Paris finished the presidency, I decided I cannot work for the foreign ministry with his governments anymore. So I went with him to the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation, where I'm still working, but I was always looking to do policy because I'm a policy person, and the Paris Center is not about policy. It's about people-to-people projects. So I kept in touch with J Street. I was supporting the Mitvim new think tank and Geneva initiative. And then 2.5 years ago, J Street asked me if I want to turn my hobby of helping J Street into a day job. And since then, I'm their representative in Israel. And I have to tell you that it is so good to feel impactful. As someone who's part of the peace camp in Israel, it sometimes feels very lonely during the Netanyahu governments. And you feel that you can't really do something. And with J Street, I feel that I'm doing something every day for the things that I care about deeply and for the country that I love deeply. And J Street deals with exactly the things that I care about, whether it's the Palestinian issue, whether it's the Israeli-US relations, whether it's Israel diaspora relations. And just to give you a few examples, when we host members of Congress, which is one of the things the Israeli office is doing, after less than a week in Israel, they come knowing more about the conflict than most Israelis. And they're coming with a sense of urgency and a sense of agency that they could do something about it, because they come with this balance that we keep on, with those delegations, that they understand why it is so important to have a homeland for the Jewish people, a secure homeland for the Jewish people, and at the same time, how important it is to end the occupation and to have a Palestinian state, and how important is the American role. So I have several examples of how those members of Congress made the difference when they went back to Washington. But recently, and now I'm getting to the situation on the ground, when we started with this kind of new government and with what they call the judicial reform, even though I don't think it's a judicial reform, which we definitely need. It's a regime overhaul. We had a letter of members of Congress. Many of them came with us at the last delegation that happened while the demonstrations were going on. And they wrote a letter, 92 members of Congress wrote a letter to President Biden, asking him to take a position on the side of democracy in Israel for the special relation, and to also make the connection between the democracy and the Palestinian issue, which is, of course, very important for us in J Street. And this is an example. And after this letter, we heard that Biden actually said, when he got off the plane, and he was not really crafted and spoke his heart, that he believes Netanyahu should change course, and that he's not invited anytime soon to the White House. And the demonstration afterwards in Kaplan, you saw American flags because people felt we have the American president defending our democracy. So for me, in the 2.5 years I'm in J Street, I felt very much at home and very much impactful, but now more than ever. Because what we have right now in Israel, the bad news is, but don't worry, I'll get to the good news. The bad news is that we have, I think, the most awful government we ever had. We have a convergence of several sectors who really want our judicial branch to be much weaker for their own interest. The ultra-Orthodox, who wants it because the Supreme Court tried to keep equality, and they want their benefits. They don't want to do national service. They don't want to have to study things in their schools. And they want the country to be much more Orthodox and in a way that is a threat for women, for LGBTQ, for non-Orthodox denominations, for Arabs, of course, and for secular Jews like me. We have the Messianic settlers, Jewish supremacy. You know what is white supremacy here. This is Jewish supremacy. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, who know that the Supreme Court is the only protection for the Arab minority in Israel. And they want a state where the Arabs are not even second-class citizens, but much lower than that. And they also want the ability to do whatever they want in the territories in a way that will eventually lead us to a one-state disaster, where we will either be a bloody place or an apartheid state. And they know that the Supreme Court is kind of the only protection from those things. And what really is the glue for all those sectors is the corruption cases of our prime minister that want the judicial system to be weaker, because he knows that this is the only way for him to fire the attorney general, to maybe pass the French law in the Knesset without a judicial review. And because Likud, which used to be a liberal party, the revisionists, Begin, were different than me on many issues, but they were liberals who believed in an independent judicial system. But now the Likud party became very much like the Republican Party here, a cult personality of Netanyahu party. And if it's good for his legal future, it's good for them. Yeah, the French law is kind of a law that says that while you're acting as prime minister, you're immune from any prosecution and any legal action.
So if you're the prime minister forever, you're fine.
Exactly. And unlike here, when presidents could be only 2 terms, 8 years in Israel, there are no limit to how long a prime minister could serve, as long as he get elected. And when you hurt the judicial system, you actually can create a situation where you will always get elected because you play with the rules. And then Israel will become, in the beginning, something like Hungary or Poland, where they're democracy because there are elections, but it's not a liberal democracy because there are no protections for minorities or any individual rights. And I think that Israel will even become worse than Hungary, because Hungary and Poland still have the mechanisms of the EU as a protection, and they don't have a national conflict and all the problems that we have. So we will probably become much closer to, I don't know, Turkey or Russia or Iran. But, and here I'm getting to the good news. The good news is that I guess when I used to hear this kind of Leninist Marxist that things have to get worse in order to get better, I always thought, no, that's gonna lead to bloodshed. We don't want to get to, but actually, I guess we needed that. And this government created an awakening, a liberal awakening of Israel, of many people who were, liberal in their views, but they were not very ideological, not very involved, pretty indifferent. They lived in denial about what's happening in Nablus or other places in the West Bank, and also what's happening with the Arab minority in Israel and what's happening outside the Tel Aviv city that never stopped, the startup nation. I always told my Tel Avivian friends who felt this way that this is like enjoying the jacuzzi on the Titanic. because eventually they will have to face this moment of decision, what we are, who we are. And now they're awakened and they're going to the streets to demonstrate. 17 weeks, I think already. Yeah, when Jonathan Geffen died, it was the 16 weeks, which was very symbolic. And that gives people power, the feeling that they are not alone, that they're not going to let the ultra-Orthodox, Messianic, and their corrupt people to control their life anymore. Now, the big question is, how do you make those connections with the other things that are Israel suffers for a long time? You know, the lack of separation between state and religion, the national state law that is telling the Arab community 20% of our citizens that not only de facto they're discriminated like many minorities in the world, but also de jure. And of course, the occupation, which I believe, J Street believe, is the biggest threat to Israel. And trust me, I know pretty much about Hezbollah, about Hamas, about Iran. None of them are even close to the threat of Israel losing its identity. We are much stronger than Iran, even if they'll have the nuclear bomb. And we have second strike capabilities. It's not the time to get into details. But if we will not do something about the fact that we control another people, which is both strategically and morally doesn't serve us and doesn't serve our Jewish values, then we're doomed. So the question is how to use those, and people ask me, so what's going to happen? And I have no clue, of course, because nobody has a clue. But I can tell you that there are negotiations in the president's office. I don't think they will lead to anything. Actually, there are only two parties that are part of the negotiations: the Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid party, and Benny Gantz, Amachaneh Mamlachti. I could never translate it to English. The national camp, and Labor, Lieberman, the two Arab parties felt that it's not real negotiations and there is no transparency, so they left. And the other issue is that the politicians are not really leading the demonstrations. The demonstrations are started as a spontaneous thing by different groups, but it now had a pretty sophisticated headquarters, and the politicians are pretty much taking a ride. They're not leading it. So even if they will reach a compromise, which I doubt it, I don't think that will end the demonstrations. People want something much more tangible than just reversing the whatever, how you dominate judges and other things that, changing the seniority in the Supreme Court or whatever. Many people are talking about constitution. We don't really have a constitution. Ben-Gurion in the early days thought that it will be too dangerous to start with those internal debates when we are being attacked by 5 of our neighbors. So he delayed it, and we had the Harari compromise that said we were going to have a constitution in phases. And Aaron Barak, the Supreme Court judge, with Dan Meridor from Likud in those days, and Amnon Rubinstein started to kind of create several basic laws, but even how to legislate a basic law, we don't really have a mechanism. It's kind of like every other law. So we need a much better constitutional framework. And I think that this is something that the demonstrators are looking for. I think some of the demonstrators also want the Netanyahu government to fall because they understand that you can't really compromise with this government and you can't really reach any saint constitution. So we don't know what will happen. If now they will decide to push with the legislation, we might reach what we call a constitutional crisis, which means that the Knesset, which is in Israel, is actually led by the executive. There's no real separation of branches between the executive and the legislative branch. If they push a legislation that the Supreme Court and the Attorney General say that it's not constitutional, then people will have to decide, who are we listening to, the law or the politicians? And I think most important sectors of Israeli society, the high ranks of the military, the Shabak, Mossad, high-tech, economy, academia will go with the law and not with the government. I believe that eventually it will lead to explosion of this coalition because they will not be able to deliver to their constituencies. There are already many strains in this coalition because they came with certain things in the campaigns that they will have more governance and more security, and the situation on the ground is exactly the opposite. The economy is going down the drain. People are refusing to serve. The international status of Israel is being hurt, and more people within Likud are starting to understand that this is not what they wanted when they voted for Likud, and that maybe Netanyahu, by putting himself instead of putting the country first, is becoming more of a liability than an asset. But we're not there yet. They still have 64 members of Knesset. So the demonstrations are critical, and it's critical that the international community, and when I speak about the international community, I'm speaking mostly about the US, will use that amazing moment of opportunity where people are out of their comfort zone and where people are willing to kind of think again about some of their, the things that they always thought. This is a moment to really move things. I think it was Rami Manuel who said, "Don't let a crisis get wasted," and we shouldn't let that crisis get wasted. And this is where we need the American Congress, American administration to speak for democracy, to act for democracy, and to also help Israelis understand that democracy is not just for Jews, and that if you're a liberal, it's not just that you wake up when someone is going after your rights, but you have to care about other people's rights, and that there is a connection, and there's no democracy with occupation. So we have big expectations, and I know people tell me, no, it's not, Biden will not do it. He has so much on his plate, which is true, but it's also true that we had several cases when we pushed a Democratic Party that is much more receptive to our messages than any time in the past, and they pushed the administration. We saw more action, whether it was the ceasefire in May 21, and we believe that it is important for Jewish Americans who care deeply about Israel and care deeply about democracy. By the way, J Street added to our tagline, which used to be pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy, before everything started in Israel, because of what's happening here with the insurrection. And because many people in our community were kind of amazed that AIPAC supported 109 insurrectionists in the midterm elections. But now it's also very relevant for Israel because those things are connected. And the fight for democracy in the world, in Israel, in America, in Ukraine, in Iran, is very much connected. And so this is our message, and this is why we're so happy for the kind invitation. I know it's always, as Consul General, I know that for rabbis and for congregations, it's always tricky to get the debates inside. You always want to keep consensus, and things are very emotional, but I do believe that we have to speak about everything, and that's part of who we are as Jews. And whether people agree with us or not, we should be open to listen to everybody. So I'm happy for this opportunity, and now I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have.
With all the demonstrations going on.
Before we ask questions, that just say your name
Exactly.
and
That I know who I.
My name is Mark Schnitzer. I'm a member of the synagogue. I've been to Israel only once in 2005 when the Gaza Strip was being switched over to the Palestinians. But my question is, with all these demonstrations going on that they want a more liberal democracy in Israel, how come they can't vote Netanyahu out?
Well, first of all, I think they will, but first we need elections for that to happen. In the recent polls, Likud is shrinking. Also, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are shrinking. Gantz is going up, dramatically. I'm sorry?
Lapid remain in the same
Lapid,
place.
losing a little. I think this is because Gantz is kind of channeling a lot of the people from Likud who think that going to Lapid is too much, but going to Gantz, who has also Gidon Sar, which is kind of the Israeli Lincoln project. He used to be Likudnik. So I think they find their home with Gantz. So I think if there were elections tomorrow, Netanyahu will be out of office. How do you get to an election? So this is one of the reasons why Netanyahu really want to push in this Knesset session of the Knesset the budget. When you can't pass a budget, it's one of the ways for Israeli governments to fall. And because they want to pass a budget for 2 years, they think that will give him some quiet for 2 years. On the other hand, the ultra-Orthodox parties are saying, no, you promised us in the coalition agreements that before we pass budget, you pass the legislation that give more exemption for Haredi boys, to be in the military and to become part of the workforce in earlier age. So there are strains in this government. It's very hard to predict when it will fall. The Israeli history shows that there is a certain dynamic when what's gluing people in the coalition is that they think that the elections will be worse for them and they will get less. But then at some point, some politicians are starting to think that maybe I should be the first to jump because maybe it will help me in a longer term politically. This would happen to the previous government. And I think this will happen at some point, especially if we have a constitutional crisis.
Because you've had how many elections in a few, 5 elections or something like that?
Well, the elections, what decides election is what is the agenda. This was not on the agenda. I think in the next election, people that never knew what is Montesquieu and what are separation of powers and what is, now are all in it. So the next elections, this will be on the ballot. In the previous elections, I think a lot of it was about governance and how we, keep security. And many of the left, just did not go to vote. Many were frustrated with the leadership, the fact that Meretz and Labor did not run together and Meretz didn't cross the threshold, the fact that the Arab parties did not run together, wasted a lot of votes. So there are a lot of lessons, but I think that when we will have elections, I don't think Netanyahu will remain prime minister.
So when you project an election, when do you think it'll happen?
I learned that it's very dangerous to predict both in America and Israel. I used to be considered an expert to American politics until I got to too many television studios and said in 2016 that there is no way Trump could become a president. So, I don't know when that will happen, but I think that you're starting to feel more and more strains in the coalition. Ben-Gvir was not invited to the last cabinet meeting because I think Netanyahu and Gallant, the defense minister, understand that he's going to do politics while they have a security situation to solve. So those strains are going to become even more, and it will create more demonstrations and more issues with the economy and with the reservists and international community. So I think that eventually we will get there.
Hi, my name is Alan Mabrook. I'm curious to know who are the chief justices and have they been appointed by Netanyahu? And is there any sense for how they're feeling about what's going on?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court judges are being selected by a committee that is that has a representation from the government, representation from the opposition, representations from the current Supreme Court, representations from the Bar Association, a certain kind of mix that's supposed to have, the internal checks and balances. There are complaints that, that the judges, because they have a veto, the Supreme Court judges, they tend to elect people that are like them, which has some merit to it. That people say we don't have enough Mizrahi Jews there, or we don't have enough Arabs there. And there's no doubt that we do need reforms. But not this reform, to create a situation where the politicians choose the judges, that means that there's no separation of power whatsoever. Now, if you hear Netanyahu when he's interviewed, Fareed Zakaria and other, he says, but in America also the politicians select the judges. First of all, I'm not sure the American system is the best one. If you ask me, I think there are better ways in the world. But even here, it's not exactly true because the Senate is not necessarily in the hands of the president. And even in the Senate, you need a special majority to overcome filibuster. So we remember when Obama was not able to nominate, Garland to replace Scalia when he died, and McConnell was able to really stop it. So it's not exactly true, and it's also, in America there are so many other checks and balances. You have two chambers, you have a federal system, you have a constitution. There's so many things that we don't have in Israel. In Israel, the only protection for minority rights is the Supreme Court. So if we will let the politicians select the judges, that's the end of Israel democracy, or at least liberal democracy.
So in general, would you say that the Supreme Court justices in Israel are more conservative or more liberal, or does it?
So, well, first of all, depends who's, the common wisdom is that they tend to be more liberal. If you ask me, that's not true. I think that the Supreme Court in many ways legitimized the settlements, and in so many cases completely accepted what the defense echelon says. And to say that Shamgar, who was, for Etzel or the liberal, they were not liberal. And on top of that, when Ayelet Shaked was the minister of justice, she had a special deal with the head of the Bar Association, Efi Naveh, and they were able to get some very conservative judges to our Supreme Court. I think we have 3 settlers in our Supreme Court. So it's part of those, the slogans of populists to say that they're all liberal. It's not true. And I think that today, when you see Esther Hayut, the president of the Supreme Court, when you see Gali Baharav Miara, the Attorney General, these 2 women are actually the last stop to stop the Netanyahu government from taking over. And I think that what they say, it will influence the demonstrations much more than what Lapid or Gantz say.
I want to make sure that you just mentioned 2 women. We heard 2 men. Let's create more gender equality in this room at least. Sharla, and then Maya, and then Jeffrey, and Donna. Sharla, Donna, Maya, and then Jeffrey. Jeffrey, we'll put you one slot later.
So I'm Charlotte Kibble, and I was in Israel during the last election in October. It was a very.
It was you, Sharla.
The Israelis I was around were not happy. I was there for a youth movement gathering. I was part of the group Habonim, and one of the members was saying they were involved in creating a new party called Kol Ezracheha, all citizens, that would include both Jewish Israeli and Arab Israeli participants. And that ties into my question about the role of the Arab parties during all of this upheaval, and how the goal for justice for Palestinians and democracy for the different Jewish Israeli groups can be worked on together.
Yeah, great question. And one of the most frustrating things in this in those demonstrations is that the Arab citizens of Israel or Palestinian citizens of Israel, which I think is a more correct way, don't feel invited. They don't feel invited because the demonstrators didn't want the right-wingers, whenever there were Palestinian flags, they said, oh, you see, they're not patriots. So they decided to reclaim the flag. And you see all the demonstrations with the Israeli flag, with the national anthem, the Declaration of Independence. It's all very, and I think that for the Palestinian citizens of Israel, they don't feel that this is about them. And whenever you try to raise those issues, people tell you, no, but it's not the time. You will break the unity and we cannot bring some soft right-wingers. And they also believe that the Supreme Court was not so much for them. I think it's a mistake, and many of their leaders are saying it because they will suffer more than anybody else if this government will get their way, but they still cannot connect with this sentiment. And I do believe that the future of liberalism in Israel is definitely in holding hands between Arabs and Jews, just like it is between American Jews and Israelis. And it is a pity, and I hope it will change. By the way, I do see I'm there every week, and there is different blocks in the demonstration in Kaplan, at least in Tel Aviv. There is the women block, and there is the academia block, and the LGBTQ plus block, and I always go to the occupation block, and then I go to others, and it's growing every week. And before I came to the States, I was in the joint memorial service for Palestinian Israelis, and it was the larger ever by far, 15,000 people. So it shows me that people are starting to make the connections, and I hope that this will lead to a situation where the Arab will feel more into it, and this discussion about how it, about their democracy and not just for Jews will be part of it. So you definitely touch a very important thing. We don't know where it's going, but I hope it will go the way you said.
Donna? I thought you were raising your hand. So Maya, and then Jeffrey.
I have enough questions for her to.
Maya, introduce yourself, please,
I'm Maya.
including your role.
I'm from Jewish Valley. I'm a Jewish culture director. Jewish Silicon Valley is the merge between the Federation and the local JCC. First, I want to use the stage for a short promo. I see many questions about the judicial process in Israel, and in Shavuot on May 27th, we have a lecture about exactly this with a local law professor from Berkeley, Tamir. So everyone is invited if you want to learn more about.
Could you speak a little louder?
Yes.
And a little slower.
So I want to invite you to a lecture about the judicial process in Israel from the Declaration of Independence until today, and why we don't have a constitution, because I see many questions here. So it's going to be on May 27 in a local house, and everything is on our website of Jewish Silicon Valley on May 27. And you can come to me later if you have questions. So that's one. And now to the questions. So you said that you feel that we can talk about everything. And I know that occupation is a big thing, but doesn't it scare away those people that still feel that this reform, that they don't like the reform, but they don't feel connected to the conversation about the occupation? And don't you want that we will be, big now, and we will come in big numbers to push away and to fight for democracy? But sometimes, the signs about the occupation feel that they are, that's like a different battle. And I know that Shira Geffen, wore the Stop the Occupation shirt during Yonatan Geffen's, because she feels, and many people feel that we should shout it everywhere, but it kind of contradicts. The other question is, people have criticism toward some Jewish people that demonstrate here, and say that we put it out there, the dirty laundry, that we don't fight for Israel, but we criticize Israel, and it in the long term, it shows that we are, there's a split, and there's a lot of criticism around Israel, and it gives some, meat to those that criticize Israel in the long term. So what do you think about that? Because we have people here that really arrange.
She's wearing a different shirt today.
Yeah. Of course, you know, they
Unacceptable.
are acceptable and the local protests, and I don't see so many faces from here. I guess they feel this debate, whether they should be there and how it affects local communities, maybe not just Jewish communities. The third question, if you have.
I won't be able to remember.
Okay.
I'm senile.
Just the lack of left-wing leaders in Israel to, you know, what there's like just a lack of leadership. And so.
You wanted to say?
I just want to give a reference for those that heard the name Jonathan Geffen for the third time and have no idea what we are talking about. Jonathan Geffen is an Israeli poet who passed away a few weeks ago. He wrote incredible things, and many of them were also for children, with very important messages. He had a band called Keves Shishasar,
Yeah.
and the fact that he how to say Keves
Lamb.
the 16th lamb, and he passed away on the 16th demonstration. And so Israelis were very focused on the number 16 during that time, and her children are quite popular and famous. And they, during the funeral, his daughter made a political statement with the shirt that she was wearing. And there was a huge public conversation around if she needed to do that demonstration or not. And most people were very happy about it because it was in the spirit of her father. That was a footnote. Now, good luck with Maya.
So, Maya, to your question, first of all, of course, I recognize the tension between those who don't think that it's time to bring issues that might tear this unity. And I recognize that. So even though I think that the Palestinian flag is very much part of the Zionist vision that I see, I'm not going to use it I can understand the tactical, but I do want to find a way to move it eventually towards that direction, because for me to just reverse the Levin-Rothman reform, whatever, is not enough, because eventually if we won't deal with the occupation, so we will be a democracy for maybe a few more years, but it's not good enough. So I understand the tension, I understand the tactics, but I'm trying to, and that's one of the reasons why I say one of the things that can make the connection is the US. And the members of Congress who made the connection in their letter, and if the Biden administration make the connection, I think it will help many Israelis to realize that. And eventually, when the US was kind of supporting the Camp David negotiations with the Egyptians, it led to a situation where the most right-wing, anti-territorial compromise gave up Sinai and dismantled the settlements. So this is my kind of to you as Americans, that the American Jewish community, the American Congress and administration could help Israelis connect the dots, even if internally it's harder to do. On the second question, that was
about protesting here.
Yeah. So I never accepted this thing about dirty laundry outside. We live in a global world. Everything is out there. The right wing never hesitated to work outside Israel. So this story about we're showing democracies have debates, and it's completely legitimate to have debates, and we can have it everywhere. And if we claim that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish community should be part of the debate. And if we say that the special relations between US and Israel is democratic liberal values, then America should be part of the debate. And on top of that, when our government now is trying to kill the laundry machine, then we have to launder it somewhere else because they're going after our democracy at home. So I don't buy this thing about dirty laundry. I think that people who care about Israel should deal with everything. And when you try to picture Israel as this Disneyland with no outflows, without problems, and then kids go to campus and all of a sudden they understand that it's not the world that you told them, and they don't know how to react to it. So in J Street, we want to show the real picture of people who care deeply about Israel, who believe in Zionism, but believe that Israel also have some issues to solve. And I think it's completely good for Israel that we have this open conversation outside. In terms of the leaders of the left, when are you coming to lead the left?
I think you're next.
So listen, you don't.
We have on the 20th in the JCC in Palo Alto, we'll have the visit of Rabbi Gilad Kariv. He might come for a coffee earlier to Los Gatos, but we'll see that. We are working on that. Otherwise, you will need to go to Palo Alto.
Rabbi Gilad Kariv is a great leader and one of the, if not the strongest voice for, for this pluralism views and for ending the occupation in the Knesset. And as a Reform rabbi, I think it is also very symbolic that he's now. I'm saying it as a friend also of Merav Michaeli with all the criticism. I do believe that we need more women leadership, as you said here. During the COVID, I was witnessing how countries dealt with COVID, because COVID was kind of bringing the new world, that the exponential change, creating a situation where leaders don't really understand what's going to happen. And the leaders that react better are leaders that are humble enough to understand that they don't know and to have a learning process. And in most of the countries that dealt with it better were led by women.
We saw that coming.
Yeah.
So the humble enough was enough.
Exactly. So, and in Israel, because of the military and stuff, we have too much machoism in Israeli politics. So as much as I really like Gilad Kariv, I don't want it to be sound as if I'm taking down Merav Michaeli already.
We have Jeffrey and then Doron and then Diane, and then I will ask you a question, I think, and then we'll give you the opportunity to choose if you want to continue or you want a break. I want to be mindful of the time.
I don't need a break.
I'm Jeffrey Paulin, and I have a couple of questions, but the first one, I just want you to put into perspective for all of us, what percentage of the actual people in Israel are the right wing, are the ultra conservatives, ultra orthodox, the messiahs, etc.? In other words, what percentage?
Yeah.
People-wise.
Of course, it's hard to measure because people don't say I'm a messianic settler or in the but in general, it's pretty well known that we have between 20 to 21% Palestinian citizens of Israel. Most of the Muslims, small minority, also Christian. The ultra-Orthodox society is between 10 to 15, but it's growing because they have big families. Some people tell me that it's not linear, and someone even told me that ultra-Orthodox women make more secular kids than secular women, because out of those big families, many of them actually live there, and especially now when there's the big admors, the big are kind of they're not. The leadership that they used to have is no longer there. So there are many people who are leaving the ultra-Orthodoxy, but I don't have the numbers to say how much, and it's not a very well-known statistics.
Even so, you're saying it's below 20%.
Absolutely.
And yet they're controlling things, which is very astounding to me. The other thing, the next thing I want to ask you about is, why is Netanyahu and the government fully supporting Trump's idea of making Jerusalem the capital, which I know is definitely one of the most irritating things that they could have possibly done? So
on the first remark, I will tell you that the political system in Israel is such that small parties have much more power than because in order to build a coalition, you need the small parties, and the ultra-Orthodox always knew how to play that in a way, and Netanyahu knows that with ultra-Orthodox, he doesn't have majority, and he can't really get out of trial. So this is why they have much more power than they're supposed to. On the second question, I can tell you that Jerusalem is our capital. And I think the Trump move of the embassy to Jerusalem didn't really change that. What the big problem with it was not that he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, was that he kind of told the Palestinians that your aspiration to have a capital in East Jerusalem is off the table. That is the problem. I do want all embassies to be in Jerusalem because Jerusalem is indeed our capital.
I didn't
But
want that.
but
I thought that it was exclusionary. I thought it was either one country or the other. And
No. I think that if I were the American president, which is not likely to happen, I would say, yeah, I'm moving my embassy to Arnona in this case, and on the same time, I'm building an embassy in Sheikh Jarrah. Because for me as a Zionist, the most important thing for the future of Zionism is the two-state solution, and every move that doesn't support the two-state solution is actually anti-Israeli, the way I understand it. And that's why the Trump move, I think, was counterproductive, but not because he moved it, but because he didn't do anything for the aspiration of Palestinians to also have their capital one day.
right. And then the last thing that I was wondering is, give us your thoughts about how we could fast track creating a constitutional government there.
I'm just gonna be the bad guy for a moment and tell Nadav we have about 5 minutes.
And we need Doron to ask a question.
And the young Fisher.
And who?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. I think that it is now much more on the agenda of people than ever since the creation of Israel. So I do think it will be an issue in the next elections. I think that a lot of energy will be put into it. You hear it from Lapid and others who are saying this should be the goal. You hear it in the demonstrations. So I do think that we have a moment of opportunity. It's not going to be easy, and it might happen only after the collapse of this government, before the next elections or after the next elections. So I can't really tell you, but I think it's definitely imminent now.
Doron.
Okay, yeah, I just have two comments. One is that the system in Israel is really brittle. There's just two branches of government, really, as you explained, right? The court system can be changed even if they don't change the system. There are all sorts of tricks they can pull to change the courts. They can, in that committee, they can make things happen. And because the system is so brittle, that alone, just a little trick, can change the whole situation. And it's dire because Israel is very centralized. There's one ministry of education, one police, one court system. It's not like here that is distributed, and every state has its own court system, and there's a DA here and a DA here, and an attorney general here and an attorney general there. It's not like that. Like who's suing Trump? With 5 different attorneys are suing Trump. That would never happen there. It's one organization, so it's very brittle, and that's why the danger is there. The second comment is that I'm a bit less optimistic because when you look at Bennett's government, who is supposed to be the opposition, he is very right-wing. Lieberman is extremely right-wing. He lives in a settlement. By the way, I served in the West Bank as a paratrooper, so I was there. I actually was on the ground when the first settlement was established in 1977. I served in Jabalia, in Gaza. I served in Hebron after the massacre. So I have hands-on knowledge of what's going on there with the occupation. That's a big elephant in the room. That is the cause of everything in my mind until they solve this damn thing, and then won't.
So I will tell you something that as a disciple of Shimon Peres, I learned from him about optimism. That optimists and pessimists die the same way, but they live very differently.
Say it again, what? Optimists and pessimists die
the same way,
way,
but they live very differently.
Okay.
And not only that it's more healthy and fun to be an optimist, it's also more constructive because optimists tend to see the opportunities while pessimists only see the problems and the threats. And I do believe that the change in the world is also always happening by optimists. And who would believe that Menachem Begin will do the peace with Egypt when the situation changed? Who would believe that Sharon, who said that Netzarim and Tel Aviv are the same, will move out of Gaza? Who would believe that, when I was at the Kennedy School, I learned the case of the Good Friday Accord in Northern Ireland, and Mitchell said, everybody said it's impossible until one day it was inevitable. So I believe in optimism, not only because our national anthem is hope, but because optimists are the one who are changing the world and not pessimists. So I saw what happened with J Street that started as a small startup, and now it is a big